Hey y'all, it's me, Bill Ferriter, and it's time for another 10-minute team tip. I would say one of the most common questions that people ask me when they're getting their collaborative team up and running is how do you get people to look at assessment results together without feeling threatened or without feeling like looking at data is a competition between teachers? And that's a really natural reaction for teachers to have. When we get our assessment results, we automatically think that those assessment results say something about us. And we also automatically worry, or at least wonder, what everyone else at the table is going to think when they see our results compared to theirs. That's a natural reaction for people to have, particularly in a profession where we've worked in a kind of isolated way for most of our careers. We've never really looked at results together. We've never really thought about how does my teaching stack up to the teaching of the person across the hallway. So one of the tips that I always like to give people when they're talking about how do you get people to embrace looking at assessment results with one another is to remember that the results are really not evidence of the performance of a teacher at all. Let me say it more directly. The results aren't about you, and the results aren't about me. The results are giving us evidence of the efficacy of our instructional practices instead. Does that make sense to you? So it isn't a function of my results were better than your results. Instead, it's the strategy that I used produced better results than the strategy that you used. And those are two very different things. Now, I want to show you where this all fits into the PLC foundational literature, right? Here's Rick Dufour, Becky Dufour, and Bob Aker, and it's my favorite definition of collaboration. In it, Rick, Becky, and Bob say that when we're on a collaborative team, our goal is to relentlessly question the status quo. And I just like that phrase all by itself because you can walk out of a meeting and know whether or not it felt like you were relentlessly questioning anything together. But the definition does get more sophisticated because Rick and Becky and Bob go on to explain how we relentlessly question the status quo. And the way we do that is by seeking new methods of teaching and learning, testing those methods, and then reflecting on the results together. Notice what we're not testing. We're not testing the teachers. We're testing the methods. We're not reflecting on the performance of the teachers. We're reflecting on the performance of the practice. We're reflecting on whether or not that strategy produced results that are going to help us to move forward. Another way to think about it is that when we collaborate, we're engaged in recurring cycles of collective inquiry. I like that phrase too. It means that we're studying our practice together. Our whole entire goal is to identify strategies that work to help students learn at higher levels and to use those strategies more often. John Holt in 1964 said the highest functioning teams are working to flunk unsuccessful practices together. I love that phrase. It's not about flunking unsuccessful teachers. It's not about figuring out which teachers are the good teachers and which teachers are the bad teachers. It's about figuring out which strategies are the most effective strategies and which strategies should we ditch because they're not giving us the results that we wanted to get. Do you see how important that is? It's easier to look at data with your name next to it and compare that data with your colleagues as long as you know it's not a competition between figuring out which teacher's better and which teacher's worse. Instead, it's an effort on our part together as peers to find out which strategy is better and which strategy is not as effective. So it isn't about you and me, it's about the practice. Now let me give you a very tangible example of what this looked like in action. This is a set of assessment data from my collaborative team. We were using observations to identify students who were making common errors as we sought to teach them about communicating findings in a lab report. So together as a team, we started by saying, hey, here's the mistakes that kids normally make. Let's try to teach them not to make those mistakes. And we all went off and tried our own strategies to do that. Then we used observations in order to record whenever a student was still making the mistake, even after we had tried to teach them not to. And immediately, if you look at this data set, and remember, it's my data set, I think you can probably notice that the strategy that I used to teach procedures, it worked pretty darn well. How do I know? Very few students were making that mistake after I taught the strategy to them. Now, what that means is when we go back to the collaborative table, I'm not going to say to my peers, hey, I'm the best at teaching procedures. But I might say, hey, guys, I found a strategy that works pretty well. Do you want to know what it is? Similarly, I hope you noticed, and your eyes probably went here first. The strategy that I use to teach my students to use evidence in their conclusions, I'm going to say it bluntly, my strategy was trash. It didn't work at all, did it? How do I know? Look at all the students that are still making the mistake even after I taught my students not to make that mistake. So my practice for teaching that students not to make that particular mistake is really garbage. I need to stop using it, right? When we go to the collaborative table and I lay this data on the table, I'm not embarrassed or ashamed at the number of initials that I have in that particular box. What I've done is I've found a strategy that none of us should ever use again. Right? Does that make sense? In a way, I've done my team a favor. Hey guys, I found something that doesn't work. Let's not use it. And similarly, when I go to the collaborative table, I'm going to say, guys, my strategy didn't work. I'm going to need your help. Does anybody have a better idea that I can try? And we'll be able to find that in the assessment evidence, right? When we find a teacher who's got very few initials in that fourth box, that's the person that I need to learn from. That's the person that has something that they can teach me because my practice is clearly not working. So that language, that notion of we're not studying people, we're not trying to find out who the good teachers are and who the bad teachers are. Instead, we're trying to find the practices that have the greatest impact on students as learners, and we're trying to amplify those. Let's use those practices more often because we know they work. And similarly, we're trying to find practices that we just shouldn't use anymore. In Holt's language, let's flunk unsuccessful practices when we discover them. So I've made a contribution to my team here, even though my results were the worst. I've discovered a strategy that we shouldn't use again in our instruction of kids. That's actually a win. How wild is that? Sometimes as teachers, we go to the collaborative table and we have what are obviously going to be some crummy results. And we think in our heads, I'm embarrassed to share this with other people. But in reality, you're making a contribution to the team. You've learned something valuable too, even when you got results that you're not happy with. The lesson that you've learned is you found a strategy that doesn't work, so let's ditch it. My friend Heather Frizzell actually goes as far as to say that we should celebrate the people who get the worst results because they've done us a favor. They've collected evidence that a practice that we might consider using too isn't worth pursuing. We've saved each other time when we discover a strategy that doesn't work, right? Because we can say to each other, let's not do this again. Let's figure out why that practice didn't work, and let's not make sure we don't replicate it anywhere in our teaching. Heather likes to say all assessment results, including those that don't meet your expectations, they're good results. Because all results, whether they meet what you were hoping to get or whether they fell short of what you were hoping to get, give you information about the efficacy of your instructional practices, and that's what collaboration is all about. Collaboration is all about more good teaching from more teachers more of the time, and we use assessment evidence to figure out what that good teaching is and looks like in action. Does any of this help? What I'm saying is don't be afraid when your results are not what you want them to be, because it doesn't mean that you failed as a teacher. Instead, it means that your strategy failed. And it's okay to find a strategy that fails. It happens to us all the time as teachers. But you can tell me a moment where a lesson you were teaching just absolutely tanked, right? We're going to have moments where our instruction doesn't work. And all we're doing when we come back to the collaborative table is sharing those moments. Hey guys, listen, I found something we should never do again. I found a strategy that's trash. I want you to say that to each other the next time you have a collaborative meeting. Did anyone discover a strategy that needs to be flunked? Or in rough Bill Ferriter language, did anyone discover a strategy that's trash? And I want you to give those people high fives. Thank you so much. I'm not making that mistake. All right. I hope this made a lot of sense to you. Make sure that you hit the like button, the subscribe button, so that you can get content in the future. And if you've got any ideas about 10-minute team tip videos, make sure you let me know. I'd be happy to share them with you. Take care now.